we now have whistleblower interview transcripts from the FBI. They're not exactly transcripts, they're FBI write-ups of the interviews that they conducted with a whistleblower who's a self-described Democrat working for the Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee, who worked for them, by the way, for 10 years, who says that he was there in 2017 when he heard Adam Schiff say, we are going to leak classified documents and intel to the media with the hopes of getting Donald Trump indicted for his alleged collusion with Russia. That this man went over and over, and as Jonathan Turley put it in his write-up, while this is only the unverified allegation of a single former staffer, the alleged conduct would involve criminal and unethical conduct of the highest order, if proven. Your reaction to this news?
Well, it's in keeping with my opinion of Adam Schiff. I've been calling him McCarthyite ever since he started in on Trump. And as John pointed out, McCarthy, at least there had some communists in the government that he was talking about, although he was irresponsible. Adam Schiff repeatedly came out and said, I have seen documents that indict, that link Trump to Russia, but I can't reveal them to you now, but just you wait, I'm going to reveal them. And of course, we know they weren't there. We know there was nothing there. Now we have this information from the whistleblower, my favorite part of which is when the whistleblower says he objected to the illegality of this. They assured him, well, we're not going to get caught. They didn't assure him, well, we're not going to do it because it's illegal. They assured him they were not going to get caught. So this is, to me, Adam Schiff has been one of the most dishonest actors out there. He was absolutely a spearhead in this hoax that Trump had somehow colluded with Russia, a spearhead to legitimize a Steele dossier that was completely ridiculous. And I think, I'm kind of the last person to feel that we should be looking backward, the last person to feel that we should be throwing people in government in jail for things that they did. But this is a situation where somebody should definitely be held accountable. This really did.
Wait, now hold that thought, because that's my next question. I'm going to tee it up with this soundbite from the vice president who gave an interview to the Gateway Pundit and said as follows, SOT 15.
Well, I think the only thing the far left really responds to is power. The thing that they're actually going to be responsive to is the recognition that there are consequences on the other side. If they get off scot-free, if they're never investigated, if they're never prosecuted when they violated the law, then they're just going to come back and do the exact same thing again. And there are a few different ways, of course. So it's the big tech companies that were censoring conservatives. They've got to know that's not going to be allowed, and there are going to be consequences for it. The banks, the president is really preoccupied with this, and rightfully so. And of course, you've got to pay the lawfare back in kind. You've got to say to the Comeys and the Brennans of the world, of course, you got to follow the law. You can only prosecute people when they actually broke the law. But we know that a lot of people broke the law in the last administration, and they've got to face real justice, not just words, not just getting hauled before a committee in Capitol Hill. If people broke the law, they have to actually be prosecuted for it. Because I think that if they do that, if they know that the consequence for breaking the law is go to jail, then the next generation of Democrats, they're not going to try the same thing.
There it is in that last line, Andrew.
Yeah. And look, to some degree, this is just simply one of the biggest dirty tricks in American politics. I mean, it always bothers me when people use words like treason, or even John Roberts was using espionage. I don't think that's what this was, but I do think it was a dirty trickery. People in the Watergate investigation, which was nothing near this, did go to jail, did do time, and there's no reason that can't happen now. One of the things I find most frustrating is the way that Trump is covered without context again and again. They talk about him looking for retribution, but really it's only justice. It's not retribution if it's justice. The things that were done to Donald Trump, who remember was Joe Biden's chief political opponent, were inexcusable and were reported as if they were legitimate. When he was prosecuted in New York for putting the wrong notation on a check to his lawyer in order to pay off Stormy Daniels, this was turned into a felony because it was somehow election fraud, but it was never stated in the indictment to the jury how this election fraud was different than just simply running for election.
And just if I could just quickly interject, but it's fine for Letitia James to allegedly incorrectly just made a mistake when she applied for her mortgage by saying that her principal residence was down in the South as opposed to in New York, where she's Attorney General. That was a mistake, you see, and we should be forgiving her for that and not prosecuting her. Where was that grace on the Donald Trump documentation of the Stormy Daniels payments?
And we know that with Donald Trump's crowds at his rallies saying, lock her up, before he was elected the first time, when he was elected, he said, no, we're not going to lock her up because that would be divisive. That was Donald Trump speaking.
He showed mercy.
He did. He showed mercy. Talk about grace. He showed mercy and he showed grace. And he showed an understanding that this is not the way we want our politics to run. Even when it's frustrating, we really do not want former presidents and former, senators being thrown in jail on a regular basis. However, at some point, the vice president is right. At some point, these guys respond to nothing but power. They abused the legal system to try and get at Trump. They abused the press to get at Trump. And of course, for me, the greatest villains of all are our media. I mean, this is one of the most a dirty trick would just be a dirty trick if it weren't for the fact that the media was willing to blow it up and turn it into basically a stated fact. The New York Times gave itself Pulitzer Prizes for covering a phantom, for covering something that wasn't there. And when they found out it wasn't there, they had to hold a meeting at the New York Times and say to the young staff there, don't worry, we'll get them on racism next time. That is the way the New York Times came to operate it, by basically telling the story they wanted to tell regardless of the facts and feeling that the facts were secondary to the story that they wanted to tell, openly saying that. So this is dirty trickery, but it's also just a hint of how corrupt our news media has become and what damage it's done to our country. Some of the places, the Washington Post, for instance, are kind of looking at themselves in the mirror and saying we got to reform a little bit. That would be nice. Some places like the Wall Street Journal, I feel, are going further down the wrong road. But ultimately, when Trump won the election the second time, what you were seeing was the vanquishing of that media. Still, we need a news media, and we need a news media that doesn't take sides, that basically reports the news. So I'm in favor of prosecuting certainly a guy like Adam Schiff, who really, really stretched the boundaries of what he was doing. And if he was leaking classified information to get at Trump, I don't see how that's not a crime. I don't see how he doesn't get prosecuted for that, at least dragged through the mud where he belongs.
Yes. And honestly, Swalwell too. I've read enough in these documents to make me very concerned about him. These things are very detailed. You got to go back and read the Just the News reports to the audience members because they're worth your time. Here's one example. So the FBI interviewed the guy in December 2017, and he said that during a September 16 staff meeting, other Democratic staffers revealed they had provided on background information to journalists about their impressions of Russian activity. September 2016, it's already starting. This is right in line with Hillary Clinton's campaign against Trump. They said the mood within the House Select Committee on Intelligence was indescribable after Trump's win. Schiff was particularly upset. As I mentioned, he thought he was going to be Hillary's director of the CIA. They said that the House Select Committee on Intelligence, the minority view, this is again the Dems, that the Democrats viewed the 2016 election as a constitutional crisis, and then talked about a particular leak from the summer of 2017. All right, so this is when summer of 2017, Trump is now in. He's been sworn in. That caused this whistleblower to confront the House Committee on Select Intelligence on this issue. He said that a particularly sensitive document was viewed by a small contingent of staff, as well as Schiff and Swalwell. Within 24 hours, he said the information appeared in the news almost verbatim. The staffer told the FBI it was suspected that Swalwell played a role in the leak. He noted Swalwell previously had been warned to be careful because he had a reputation for leaking. He said the sensitive document was read by the staffers on that committee and by members of Congress in June or early July. Its contents immediately leaked. The staffer told the Bureau, the general counsel for some spy agency, then read them the riot act about disclosure. All this behind the scenes with zero consequences. So what do we think the effect of the sparring between President Donald Trump and the Fed is going to be? Can the Fed take the right action at the right time? Do we trust in that? Or are we going to be looking at a potential economic slowdown as they slow roll any of their moves as they worry about his tariffs? And what exactly does all of this mean for your savings? You might want to consider diversifying right about now with gold through Birch Gold Group. For decades, gold has been viewed as a safe haven in times of economic stagnation, global uncertainty, and high inflation. And Birch Gold makes it incredibly easy for you to diversify some of your savings into gold. If you have an IRA or old 401k, you can convert that into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold, or just buy some gold to keep it in your safe. First, get educated. Birch Gold will send you a free info kit on gold. Just text MK to the number 989898. Again, text MK to 989898, and you'll start the process of just getting the 411 on what it means to own gold. Consider diversifying a portion of your savings into gold. So if the Fed cannot stay ahead of the curve for the country, at least you can stay ahead of the curve for yourself. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.